Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my channel? Thank you so muchy. Never thought a sticky note on a tea tray would end up being the end of my family. There it was, balanced on the edge like it belonged there. A white square of paper, not even folded. Neat, sterile handwriting. Sorry, Mom, no room anymore. In-laws need your space. I looked around the kitchen, the tea canisters I'd labeled, the child height marks on the pantry door from my grandkids, the apron I'd sewn hanging by the fridge. My hands were cold. No signature, no apology, just that message, cold as the granite countertops I'd paid for. I didn't scream. I didn't even sit down. I folded the note in half, then in half again, and slipped it into the pocket of my robe like it was a receipt I'd one day return. I walked slowly to the guest room. My room, technically, the one that overlooked the backyard I had planted. I pulled the suitcase from the closet. Medications, phone charger, 2 pairs of slacks, that old wool blanket from Vermont, and 3 framed photos. One of Mark at graduation, one of me and Linda at her baby shower, and one of all of us at the lake before everything rotted. I zipped it, didn't double-check, didn't second-guess. My coat was still hanging by the front door, same place it always was. I stared at it for a long time. A ridiculous thought hit me. It had just been dry cleaned. I remember because Linda had complained about the bill. Still, it waited there like it knew it would be worn again. 20 minutes later, I stood at the threshold, one hand on the doorknob, the other holding the handle of my little blue suitcase. I didn't cry. I simply turned the lock, stepped outside, and closed the door behind me. I didn't look back. I drove to the backup apartment on Kaufman Street. The little place I kept just in case, a just in case they never knew about. 2 years ago, Mark sat across from me at the diner on Monroe Street, stirring his coffee like he was working up the courage to ask for something big. Mom, you shouldn't be living alone. The condo's too quiet. You'd be happier here with us. The kids would love it. He reached for my hand. His eyes were tired but soft. Harold had only been gone 6 months. I was still wearing the widow's ring. I said, yes, I sold the condo for just over $300 grand. I kept a slice for myself, then gave $180,000 toward the house renovation. Mark wanted to build a second floor, add space for the kids. It's all of ours. He said, this will be your home too. No paperwork, no contracts, just family. I told myself love was better than a lawyer. I paid the contractor directly. I paid for the hardwood floors, the granite countertops, and the nursery Linda swore she couldn't afford. I even used my own credit to finance the first 6 months of mortgage payments. Quietly, happily, at first I felt needed. I helped with school pickups, dentist appointments, and late-night coughs. I was useful, but slowly the atmosphere shifted. Linda rearranged the kitchen and never put my tea mugs back. My framed photos disappeared from the hallway. Then came the new security system. I only found out when I got locked out one night. Mark said, oh, right, I forgot to add your code. That was a month ago. It hit me one night sitting on the stairs, hearing Linda tell someone on the phone. It's like having a tenant who never pays rent. I just sat there, laundry basket on my lap, too stunned to even feel insulted. I paid for the damn washer in the stairs. Still I stayed. I kept telling myself that Mark was under pressure, that Linda was stressed, that this was still my family. Now, sitting in my backup apartment with the note still warm in my pocket, I saw it for what it was. A setup, slow and careful. They didn't just want me gone. They'd been working toward it all along, and they had no idea what I still owned. By the 3rd month, I had started folding my clothes in silence just to hear something in the house respond to me. Linda rarely spoke directly to me anymore, unless it was something clipped and mechanical like, can you keep the kitchen clear after 5? Or the kids nap from 1 to 3. Please don't vacuum during that time. Everything I did seemed to clash with some unspoken routine she had declared sacred. It wasn't always cruel, just constant, exhausting, undermining. She began moving things without a word. My toiletries vanished from the guest bathroom. My tea canister was tucked behind the flower. My photo albums, once stacked on the bookshelf, were boxed up and placed in the garage like relics of a woman who no longer lived there. Each time she'd act surprised if I asked, oh, I thought maybe you were done with those, she'd say, smiling as though it were a kindness. Mark stayed quiet through all of it. He didn't defend me, didn't intervene. When I once asked if everything was okay between us, he said, "It's just a busy time, Mom. Linda's tired. We're all adjusting. That was the word he used when I asked why my name was removed from the emergency contact forms at the kids' school. And when I found the front door locked one evening after running an errand, he told me he'd updated the security system and forgot to mention it. Forgot to mention the code. Forgot to give me a key. Forgot me, it seemed entirely. That was exactly 1 month before the note appeared. I tried not to let myself believe it was intentional. I really did. But when I finally asked about the code again, nervously, almost ashamed, Mark sighed and said, "Linda and I just think we need clearer boundaries. It's not personal, but it was personal." And it had been happening piece by piece until all that remained of my presence in that house was the mug I drank from and the coat I wore. And then came the note. No warning, no conversation, just a one-sentence message folded on the tea tray I had given them for their anniversary. That night I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the backup apartment, staring at the ceiling, breathing through something that felt more like betrayal than grief. I finally said the words out loud. They want me erased. In the morning, I brewed strong coffee, opened the windows, and pulled out my old laptop. There was a time I kept all my passwords in a leather planner, but eventually I moved to spreadsheets and cloud backups. They always assumed I had no clue what I was doing online. Linda once laughed when I asked how to stream a movie, then said, "Don't worry. Tech stuff's not your generation." She didn't know I'd spent 36 years as a tax accountant for small business owners. Some of my clients ran restaurants with 10 employees and terrible bookkeeping. Others ran 3 state operations with quarterly audits. I was always polite, always quiet, but I kept copies of everything. The Kaufman apartment was small, but it had good light, a clean desk, and most importantly, a locked filing cabinet they'd never seen. Inside was the deed. Mark thought the house was ours, but legally the property was in my name. I'd kept it that way for reasons I never had to explain. Not to them, not to anyone. After Harold died, I stopped sharing everything by default. I'd learned the hard way that generosity without protection turns into liability. They never asked who actually signed the loan. They never saw the final closing documents because they never thought to look. Linda had spent years managing Image, her appearance, her kitchen, her version of our family. But I had spent my life managing risk. I logged into the county assessor's website. The title was clean. My name only, mine. I pulled up the property tax statements. Every payment had been made from my account. I checked utilities, homeowners insurance, maintenance fees, all in my name, all tracked. No matter what story they'd built in their heads, on paper, I was the sole owner. I sat back and breathed for the first time in 2 days. By noon, I was dressed and in the car, folder in hand. I hadn't seen Judith Kleen in almost a decade, not since we served on a city audit committee together, but I knew exactly where her office was. It hadn't moved in 20 years. 2nd floor, brick building, no-nonsense receptionist, and a legal mind like a scalpel. I called ahead. The woman on the phone said, "Mrs. Ward," Judith said to come right in. The waiting room was quiet, filled with sunlight and the scent of old law books and new coffee. Judith didn't stand when I entered. She never had, but she gave me a long, appraising look that wasn't unkind. "Well," she said, "you don't usually call unless something's on fire." I handed her the folder without a word. Title, deed, payment records, account ledgers, and one last item, the note. She read in silence. Halfway through, she stopped to ask one question. "You still have access to the property?" "No," I answered. "They changed the locks." She blinked just once, then kept reading. Judith had always been the kind of woman people underestimated. She wore neutral sweaters, low heels, and glasses that made her look like a librarian. But when she spoke in court, men twice her size and half her intelligence stumbled over their own arguments trying to keep up. When she closed the folder, she gave me the kind of nod you'd give someone who just brought a fully sharpened knife to a gunfight. "They have no legal standing," she said simply. "No lease, no co-ownership, no transfer of rights. They're not even squatters. They're unauthorized occupants." She turned to her monitor and started typing. "I can file a formal eviction, serve them in 5 days. We could escalate, sue for damages, press for fraud if anything's been forged." Or she looked at me over her glasses. "We can sell it right out from under them and let them find out when the moving truck pulls up." I didn't answer immediately. I looked out the window at a man walking his dog, thinking how calm the world looks when you decide you're done begging people to do the right thing. I want the house sold, I said quietly. Clean, legal, and fast, Judith smiled. Now we're talking. That night, I sat at the small kitchen table in the Kaufman apartment, a legal pad in front of me, the lines still blank. I had always loved lists, clean rows of tasks that could be sorted, measured, and executed. But this wasn't just a list. It was a map. I wasn't interested in revenge. Not the kind that makes headlines or ruins birthdays. I didn't want to humiliate them. I didn't want to fight them in court if I could help it. I wanted peace, but not the kind that comes from surrender. What I wanted was control. Quiet, complete, irreversible control. I wanted them out of my house, not next month, not after some drawn-out courtroom drama. I wanted them to come home one day and find out everything had changed and that they were the last to know. Judith said we could move fast as long as I didn't mind keeping things out of the public eye. She had a buyer already in mind, a local developer who specialized in quiet sales and fast paperwork. No open houses, no nosy neighbors, no messy negotiations, just signatures, wire transfers, and silence. I said yes. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the illusion I'd bought into that love meant silence, that sacrifice made you safe, that being needed meant being valued. But standing in the wreckage of that thinking, I saw it for what it had always been, a fantasy built on my willingness to make myself small. So I began writing my list, file sale paperwork through Judith. Contact Steve, her real estate broker, gather all receipts for repairs, taxes, utilities, every dollar I'd spent, open a new checking account in my maiden name, call the locksmith, schedule a rekey for possession day. Each step made me feel more solid. I wasn't the weeping widow anymore. I wasn't the forgotten guest in someone else's house. I wasn't Evelyn who doesn't want to cause trouble. I was the homeowner, and soon they'd realize I hadn't walked away. I had just circled the block and come back through the front door they thought they'd locked behind me. I hadn't planned to go through the storage bin in the hall closet, but something pulled me toward it. The same way you check the back seat of your car, even when you know it's empty. It was the old plastic tub labeled Phone Record Me. I hadn't touched it since the move. Inside were Harold's flip phones, some old cords, and a tiny silver recorder I used to keep in my work bag for meetings. I'd forgotten all about it. On a whim, I plugged it in and let it charge while I made dinner. Hours later, long after the dishes were dry and the emails sent, I sat down and pressed play. The first few files were business notes, dull dictations from a woman who hadn't yet learned how invisible she would become. Then, almost an hour in, came a recording I didn't recognize. The audio was faint, but I heard Linda's voice unmistakably sharp and low, speaking to someone on speakerphone. Once she's gone, we'll transfer it. My mom says we can file under caretaker terms if she signs anything at the doctor's office. A pause. Then Linda, again sounding bored, said she's getting old. We'll handle it. Mark can sign for her if needed. She won't even know. That last sentence hung in the room like a draft you didn't realize was coming until the cold hit your spine. She said it so casually, like she was talking about returning a pair of shoes. I replayed it twice to be sure. It wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't just neglect or thoughtlessness. It was a plan. They weren't just trying to edge me out. They were waiting for me to become confused, compliant, too tired to notice the paperwork. Except I'd already noticed. I labeled the file, uploaded it to a secure folder, and copied it onto a flash drive. I mailed a copy to Judith the next morning. No message, no explanation, just the evidence. For a long time, I thought the worst part of aging would be the loneliness. I never imagined it would be watching your own child prepare to steal your name off a deed before you were even dead. But now I had something they didn't know I had, their voices. I woke up before sunrise, my mind already sorting itself into categories: financials, communications, legal standing. When you've worked in tax accounting for nearly 4 decades, you learn how to think in terms of audit trails. Who signed what, who paid for what, and where the receipts lead. Paper doesn't lie. Paper doesn't pretend to love you and then lock you out of your own home. The first thing I did was log into my bank account. I downloaded every monthly statement from the past 3 years. Then I went through the mortgage history, highlighting each withdrawal I had made to cover their payments. When Mark's name wasn't added to the payments, not once, I smiled, even if it was a small one. Next came utilities. Gas, electric, water, all routed through my personal account. Linda had once scoffed at how I still insisted on paper billing, but now those envelopes were worth more than any apology they'd ever offer. By lunchtime, I had 2 binders going. One labeled ownership evidence and the other irregular activity. The first was solid and clean. The second was starting to get messy. I flagged a $25,000 transfer made from my checking account 6 months ago, supposedly a contractor advance. I hadn't authorized it. The name on the transaction, George Tilden, Linda's father. I'd met the man twice. The second time, he had slurred his way through a toast about family loyalty. Now I had a financial link. I started recording everything, every voicemail, every text. I called a mobile notary and scheduled her to witness a statement I'd be making the following week. A formal account of what had happened, including the discovery of the note, the changed locks, and the voicemail of Linda's conversation. It wasn't grief I felt anymore, not even anger. It was a kind of clarity, the feeling of finally naming a disease after months of symptoms. They tried to erase me quietly, but I'd begun writing a different ending, one with signatures, timestamps, and backup copies in 3 separate locations. If they wanted a paper trail, I'd give them one they'd never escape. The envelope arrived 3 days later. Certified mail, stiff and official-looking, no return address. My stomach knew before my eyes did. Inside was a letter from a local paralegal firm, the kind that advertises low-cost estate planning and eviction notices on bus stop benches. It began politely enough. Dear Mrs. Ward, regarding the recent transition of residence, but the real message came 2 paragraphs down. As you voluntarily vacated the premises and relinquished your right of occupancy, the current residents are proceeding with the lawful transfer of property ownership. Deed transfer documents have been submitted. They'd filed paperwork, filed it under the assumption that my silence meant surrender. I read it twice, then flipped to the copy of the gift deed they'd attached. The signatures were awkward. Linda's handwriting was neat and forced. Marks were blocky and rushed. My name was scrolled across the line in a shaky loop that didn't even match the way I write the letter W. They had forged my name. I sat very still. Then I stood up and pulled my file drawer open. I took out an envelope I'd kept for emergencies, one that contained every known variation of my legal signature from the past decade. Tax returns, bank forms, even my passport renewal. I laid them out beside the forgery. No amount of photocopying or justification would make that signature pass scrutiny. Then my phone buzzed. An email from Mark. I opened it without thinking, only to discover I wasn't the intended recipient. I'd been CC'd by mistake. Make sure Mom can't access the house before Tuesday, he wrote. The realtor will be doing a walkthrough. We'll say the papers are in progress. The subject line read, Prep for staging. He wasn't just pretending to own the house. He was trying to sell it. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Outside the street was quiet, but in my mind, I could see the locks clicking shut, the lights turning on, the smell of my old blanket still in the guest room, and 2 people parading around inside a life they thought they had won. They had underestimated me. That was their mistake. Now it was time to let the consequences catch up. I spent the weekend verifying what I already knew. Everything they touched left a mark. I started with the forged deed. I cross-referenced the notary listed on the form, a woman named Claudia Jenkins, and looked her up through the state registry. There was no such notary, not in this county, not in the next one either. Just a fake stamp and a name they hoped no one would check. It was sloppy, and I expected better from Linda, but maybe desperation makes people careless. Next, I went through my bank account again, this time with a magnifying glass and a second set of eyes. Judith had offered to help, but I wanted to do it myself. I needed to feel every line, every transaction, every theft. That's when I saw it. A transfer labeled consulting fee. $25,000 wired to a George Tilden 6 months prior. That name again, Linda's father, a retired electrician. No consulting background. No reason to be pulling money from my account. I flagged it and called the bank. They confirmed the transfer had been authorized via digital approval, except the login had occurred from an IP address I didn't recognize. Not my laptop, not my phone, likely from their house. The theft wasn't emotional anymore. It was criminal, and it had fingerprints. But the final blow came the next morning. I received another accidental email, or perhaps just careless ceasing again. This time it was from a real estate agent. Looking forward to our walkthrough Tuesday. Please confirm seller authority is fully in place. We'll bring standard listing paperwork. Attached was a staging schedule complete with interior photos, my furniture, my art, the grandfather clock that had once belonged to Harold's father. My house was being packaged and sold like it had always belonged to them. I printed every file, every transfer, every forged document, every email that proved they weren't just pushing me out. They were trying to erase my name altogether, quietly, permanently. But now I had their trail, and like any good accountant, I knew exactly where every number pointed. I sat across from Judith in her office again, the forged documents spread out on the table between us. She read them without blinking, her jaw tightening with each page. By the end, she didn't even speak, just tapped the edge of the last paper and pushed it forward. We can go after them for fraud, forgery, theft, identity manipulation. Every single thing here is prosecutable. I know, I said, but I didn't want to be dragged through courtrooms and depositions. I didn't want to become some cautionary tale whispered about in church foyers or passed around on community Facebook pages. I wanted resolution, not revenge. Closure, not spectacle. I want the house sold, I said again. Not in 6 months, not after a hearing. Now she nodded once, then reached into her desk and pulled out a business card. Steve Harmon, real estate agent. Quiet, smart, hates drama, works with developers who don't ask many questions and pay in full. We met that afternoon. Steve had kind eyes and didn't waste my time with fake sympathy. He asked for documents, verified my ownership, and within 2 days had a buyer lined up, a local property developer who specialized in converting large homes into duplexes. Cash offer, no inspections, no contingencies. I said yes without hesitation. They had already invited realtors into my home. They had already staged it like I was dead. All I was doing was honoring their fantasy, just not in the way they expected. Steve handled everything. Discreet walkthroughs, paperwork routed through Judith's office, final signatures prepared but not yet delivered. We picked a closing date the following Monday. It would be done before Mark and Linda even realized they'd been outmaneuvered. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about reclaiming something they thought they could quietly inherit. My identity, my space, my history. I had no interest in yelling. I wasn't going to storm in and demand my dignity. I was going to take the house back entirely, legally, and without a word, and they would find out when the developer showed up with keys in hand. After Steve left with the signed offer, I sat alone in the apartment for hours, the silence pressing against the walls like weather. I had done what I needed to do. Every step had been deliberate, strategic, lawful. I had protected myself. I had outmaneuvered 2 people who believed I'd just fade away. I had done it calmly without spectacle. And yet, when I poured myself a glass of water, my hands were shaking. I kept thinking about the version of Mark who used to call me when his car broke down, when his stomach hurt, when Linda was being impossible and he just needed to talk. That boy, the one who couldn't fall asleep without his toy fire truck tucked beside him, was he gone? Or had I just stopped seeing the man he became? I had sold the house. My house, their house, the place we rebuilt after Harold died. The place where I stitched so much of myself into the walls, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt like someone who'd walked away from a burning building, covered in smoke, and unsure whether she'd saved what mattered. I opened the old photo album I'd rescued before I left. It was one of the few things they hadn't boxed up or quietly moved into the garage. Inside was a picture of us on the back patio, the one before the renovation. Rusted furniture, cracked tiles, and Mark grilling in a t-shirt that read, "Number 1, son." Linda was smiling genuinely. Her arm looped through mine like we were family. I hadn't cried when they left the note. I hadn't cried when they changed the locks. I hadn't cried when I discovered the forged deed. But I cried over that photo because in it I believed they loved me. The apartment buzzed with a delivery. Dinner from the cafe down the street. I hadn't ordered it. Inside the bag was a handwritten note from Judith. Sometimes reclaiming yourself costs more than it should. Still worth it. I ate alone, quietly, carefully. I was winning, but grief doesn't care about legal victories. Grief sits at your dinner table and reminds you of what you lost, even when you chose to let it go. By Friday morning, the documents were finalized, the funds placed in escrow, and the closing date locked in for Monday at noon. The house would no longer be mine, and I would no longer pretend that any of us were family. But there was still one thing left to do. Steve mentioned that Linda had planned some kind of reception on Sunday, a garden lunch for her parents, catered, likely staged to impress. "You might want to avoid the neighborhood that day," he'd said, not unkindly. I nodded, but my mind had already started reshaping the timing. That would be the day, not Monday, Sunday. We moved quickly. Steve contacted the developer's attorney, and they agreed to conduct a pre-possession walkthrough Sunday afternoon. A quiet visit, legal counsel present, documents in hand. All we needed was access to the property. Judith handled that. She filed for a police standby, a civil standby order scheduled precisely during the walk-in window. The forged deed, the fake notary, the wire transfer to Linda's father, all documented, filed, and copied to the local precinct. The officer assigned would come only as a witness to a transfer of property. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep it lawful. I wanted it that way. I didn't want a scene. I wanted something better. I wanted truth to arrive like a train at a station, on time, undeniable, unstoppable. I called the notary I had hired weeks earlier and asked her to return. I wanted her present, even if just as a witness. We reviewed my formal statement, a sworn affidavit outlining the timeline, the evidence, and the fact that I had been removed from my own home under fraudulent pretenses. She stamped it that afternoon. Then I opened the old wooden box where Harold's watch used to sit and placed the original deed inside. Not a copy, the real one, signed, sealed, untouched by forgery. I didn't sleep that night, not from fear, but from something else, anticipation, because they would open their doors to guests, hors d'oeuvres, and champagne, and they would find me there, not as the woman they dismissed, but as the one who still owned every square inch they thought was theirs. The sun was high when I pulled up in front of the house I had bought, paid for, protected, and been locked out of. The driveway was full of luxury sedans, a catering van, and folding chairs unloaded on the lawn. Linda had spared no expense. I stepped out in a navy suit, hair neatly pinned, my mother's pearl earrings the only jewelry I wore. I looked nothing like the woman who had quietly packed a suitcase weeks ago. I looked like someone who still had everything, because I did. Steve arrived seconds later with the developer and their counsel. They nodded, said nothing. Then the patrol car pulled in behind us. No lights, no drama, just two officers, one with a clipboard, the other with a camera. Linda was on the porch when she saw us coming. Her laugh faded mid-sentence. Her smile dropped so fast it almost looked like pain. "What's going on?" she called out, stepping forward, hands already fluttering toward her necklace. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. The developer's attorney stepped forward, holding a folder thick with signed documents. Steve unrolled the purchase contract, highlighting the deed transfer, closing date, and legal sale terms. Judith handed the officer a packet, the notarized affidavit, the forged deed comparison, the wire fraud record, and the voicemail transcript. Linda's parents stood nearby, frozen. Her mother reached for her wineglass but didn't drink. Her father's expression darkened with dawning shame. Then Mark appeared in the doorway, glass in hand, confusion written all over his face. "Mom," he said, blinking like he couldn't process the sight of me. What are you doing here?" I turned slowly, what I should have done the day you changed the locks. One of the officers gestured toward the paperwork. "Per our review, this property has been sold. You were never legal owners. You have 10 days to vacate under Code 32 to 119. Linda's voice cracked as she tried to speak. Mark just stared, lips parted, disbelief painted across his face like a bruise. The guests began to retreat, first confused, then embarrassed. Linda's parents turned away without a word. No one screamed. No one defended them. They just watched as the house was handed back to the woman who never lost it. We stood in a semicircle on the front lawn, while the officers reviewed the documentation again. Linda clung to Mark's arm now, whispering furiously, her voice too low to catch, but full of panic. The developer's lawyer unfolded the forged deed and placed it side by side with the original. Even from a distance, the signature mismatch was obvious. Sloppy, rushed. Mine in name only. Judith leaned over and handed one of the officers a flash drive. "Voicemail recording," she said. Dated 3 weeks ago. Linda on a call with her mother discussing how to transfer the house paperwork behind Evelyn's back. She used the words, "She won't even know." The officer nodded and pocketed the drive. "That'll go in the file." Steve added a folder to the growing stack. Itemized record of payments. All utilities, mortgage, taxes paid by Mrs. Ward, no evidence of shared ownership, no lease agreements, no formal tenancy. This was never their house. Mark stepped forward, finally trying to steady his voice. Okay, this has gotten out of hand. We were under the impression she was gifting us the property. Then why forge her name? Judith asked, her voice calm but cutting. Why pay a non-existent notary to witness a deed that never existed? Mark looked toward Linda, who stared at the grass like it might offer an escape. And why did you transfer $25,000 to your father-in-law from Evelyn's account? I added, because I've got the bank's fraud report, Mark. They traced the IP address. It came from your house. The second officer flipped the final page of the affidavit and gave a low whistle. Well, this is a mess. No, I said. This is an ending. The guests had fully retreated now, their cars pulling away without goodbyes. Linda's parents were already gone. Her champagne table stood untouched, the linen cloth fluttering in the breeze like a white flag that came too late. Effective today, the attorney said, handing them a formal notice. You have 10 days to vacate the premises. This order is binding and enforceable. Linda finally looked up, her voice trembling. You can't do this. I met her eyes. Oh, I just did. The police left first. No sirens, no raised voices, just signatures on the notice and quiet footsteps across the porch. Linda stood motionless, clutching her phone like it could protect her. Her parents had already driven off. No hugs, no explanations, just quiet retreat. Mark kept rereading the paper in his hands, like he still thought the words might change if he stared long enough. 10 days to vacate or face a court order. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer anything. Steve and Judith stayed behind while the developer's attorney packed up the contracts. I nodded at him, then turned toward the house and said simply, Let's go inside. Judith followed me in. Mark and Linda didn't try to stop us. They had no right to. The house was still mine legally, fully, finally, and I intended to walk it one last time before the sale closed. Inside, it smelled like catered food and fresh flowers. A table was set in the dining room, untouched, linen, napkins, wine glasses, dessert plates, stacked like they were expecting applause. I moved past all of it. In the hallway, I paused at the framed photo Linda had chosen to keep on display. Our family at the lake, the same photo I had packed into my suitcase weeks ago. I looked at the copy she'd printed, straightened it with one finger, and left it crooked. Upstairs, the guest room, my room had been cleared out. But I saw the indentation in the carpet where my rocker used to sit. The dent was still there. By the time we came back down, the others were gone. Just Judith and me standing in the entryway of a house that had once been filled with promises. You did it, she said quietly. No, I said. They did. I just finished it. We stepped outside, locked the door, and walked past Linda without speaking. She didn't move. She didn't meet my eyes. That was the first moment I felt it. Not revenge, not relief, but something cleaner. Power returned to the person who never should have lost it. It didn't take long for the story to spread. I hadn't told a soul, but stories like this, the kind no one wants to say out loud, but everyone wants to whisper, don't need a press release. By Wednesday, I got a call from Helen Marcus, the neighbor 2 doors down. We'd exchanged Christmas cookies for years, even after I moved out. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. All I'll say, she murmured, is people are talking, and not kindly. The headline was never meant to control. It was Mark's son kicks mother out of her own house, loses it in legal mess. I didn't write it, but it found its way into every church gathering, book club, and PTA circle. Linda was the first to feel it. She was quietly removed from the church event committee she used to run like a CEO. No one said it was because of me. They didn't have to. A new mom was voted in within the week. Mark lasted a little longer, but I got a message from Diane, the director of the charity board I helped him join 3 years ago. Out of respect, she wrote, we've asked Mark to step down from his leadership role. We wish him the best, but Evelyn, people are disappointed. That's all I'll say. Disappointed was generous. Some people, especially the ones who never liked Linda's clipped tone or Mark's easy excuses, seemed almost relieved, like they'd been waiting for someone else to see what they'd sensed all along. I wasn't proud of their downfall, but I didn't feel sorry either. Choices echo, and theirs were loud. I stayed silent. No interviews, no explanations. I let the truth do its slow, deliberate work, the kind that doesn't knock on your door, just seeps in through the walls until there's no room left to pretend. Back at the apartment, I lit a candle and opened the window. The cool air felt clean. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it walks behind you like a shadow, silent, measured, and patient, until one day it stands in your place and says, "That's enough." The sale closed on a Monday morning without a single hitch. Steve sent confirmation by noon. The funds hit my new account in full. Judith called just to say, "It's done." There was no ceremony, no handshake, just the closing of a door that had never been truly theirs to open. Later that day, I sat with Judith in her office as she finalized one last stack of paperwork, the fraud reports. They'd be submitted to the state, the forged deed, the fake notary, the wire transfer to Linda's father. All of it logged and backed by documentation. "These aren't just civil issues," she said. "This is real estate fraud, wire fraud, identity falsification. That bank report alone could carry weight." I nodded. "We'll serve them by Friday," she added. "It's not jail time. Not yet, but it's enough to stain their names where it counts." I left with a copy of the filings tucked in my bag and a calm I hadn't felt in months. Back home, my home, however small, I closed the last joint bank account I'd once opened with Mark's name on it. There wasn't much left. They drained it slowly, like people siphoning gas from a tank they thought I'd never miss. It was shut down in under 10 minutes. I didn't call to tell them. The silence was the punishment, and the paper trail would handle the rest. Some losses aren't loud. Some victories don't need an audience. The consequences had already begun, and this time they'd arrive stamped, signed, and delivered with no warning at all.